Hello, this is John DeVore. Welcome back to the DeVore Fidelity YouTube channel. This is Roxy, who's purring up a storm at the moment, so if you hear anything strange, like a little motor in the background, it's actually just for her. So I thought I would do a brief video on my relationship to cassettes. I did an article on this that appeared online, and I will link to it below in the description. But I thought I would just talk about why I still love cassettes. Well, let me show it to you first in its little package. This is my beloved Sony Walkman Professional Junior, which is a WMD3. I've had this since new. I've had it for decades. It still works. And I have made hours and hours, days of recordings on this thing, of various bands, of my bands that I've been in, bands that I've seen, and it has made just a wonderful history of a certain aspect of my musical path. It's irreplaceable, and I still have the vast majority of those tapes. Why do I love cassettes? Well, there's a history with them. When I was a kid in the early 80s, I was the guy among all my friends who made mixtapes for other people, or I would tape strange combinations of albums, and I did that a lot. I was the audiophile since I was really young, since even before high school. That carried through, certainly through college, and in college is where I actually started building speakers for myself. But the love of cassette never went away. A cassette has, playing music on a cassette has a physicality. The music is right there on that tiny, fragile little ribbon. It's on there. You can see it spooled up. You can see it get gathered up on the return. When you play a digital file from a hard drive in a computer, there's nothing physically happening. Sure, there's data being collected, there's conversion happening, and there's an electrical impulse coming out to feed whatever the rest of your system is. But there's no thing happening. There's no thing there. You know, when you play a record, there is something happening. You put the record down on the platter, you put that needle in the groove, and then you have placed that little stylus in a groove that's filled with music, and you watch it and you listen to it trace that musical spiral all the way to the end, and then you pick it up and you put it on the other side, or you put it on a different record. In much the same way, a cassette is a physical, listening to a cassette is a physical experience. You peek in the little window on the door of your cassette deck, and you can see the two wheels turning. You can see the music spooling carefully through and over the heads, and you know that the music is on there, and you know that that's what you're hearing. So that's kind of the philosophical angle to why I love it. I actually do love the sound. A well-recorded cassette sounds great. Obviously, its specs are far poorer than most of what we listen to today. But there are certain qualities, you know, compared to earlier MP3s, there's a continuum in the music that's coming off of a well-recorded cassette that I find is lacking in a lot of low-end digital. There's a momentum, there's sort of a pace to it, and there's a friendly, you know, whatever it is, maybe it's tape saturation, much like that little digital plug-in you can use with Pro Tools. So there's some of that aspect to it. I also love my direct connection to the music that's on that little ribbon of tape in there. A lot of it is me playing, or it is me having recorded it, having chosen it specifically. You know, a playlist on a streaming service, while superficially it's the same as a mixtape is, I don't know, I feel like it's a different, you can't just go and appreciate it. This is a mixtape I made sometime in the early 90s, I suppose. with a meticulous J card. This is a particularly fun cassette. The actual cassette itself is one of the Denon heavy metal cassettes. It actually is heavy. It weighs a lot. Here's a much earlier mixtape I made. And then I have tapes from bands that no longer exist, that never really put out any albums other than cassettes. So here's one. And another band of mine. We were an East Village rock trio. This is tape 2. It's also bands that I was not in that don't exist anymore. This was a band from Brown University when I was at RISD called Dolores, and it has a few guys that went on to do much bigger things. Tim Thomas went on to found a band called Babe the Blue Ox. One of the bass players was a guy named Sasha Frere Jones, which then went on. He founded a group also in New York called UI, UI, and then became a writer for a few New York magazines and newspapers. He wrote some great pieces, I think, for the New Yorker on the music scene here. Here's a band that doesn't exist anymore. This was an East Village band called Fluffer. And they were a great band who never got signed and went away in the 90s. But this is a tape of unreleased, these are demo tracks that I was given so that I could learn a couple of drum parts for a drum audition for them. And this is the same thing. Again, these are rough mixes from someone that I auditioned as a drummer for, and then she later went on to become the singer for Pink Martini. And also I have cassettes of things that are incredibly precious to me. Cassettes of my mother playing. My mother was a concert pianist, and I have cassettes of her playing. Here's one of her tapes that she typewrote the J card herself. A typewriter is a primitive device that... never mind, I'm just making a bad joke for millennials. So the cassette deck I have that got the comments was my Nakamichi ZX9. I have a few decks around. The first deck that I had that I loved was a JVC deck from the 80s. And it was crazy. I fell in love with it because it put on a light show every time you put music through it. It had, not only did it have the normal left and right peak monitors for record level, but it also had a little 5-band spectrum analyzer. And you could set it so that it had peak hold, so that it was this whole little dancing light show. It was incredible, and I had that through college as well. That was replaced by a really beautiful Akai deck, the GX9, which I had lusted for years before I was able to save up enough to buy it. And then in the 90s, I finally saved up enough to get my first Nakamichi. I got a BX300 deck that replaced my Akai. I still have that one, although it doesn't work. And I have a Nakamichi CD1, Cassette Deck 1, which, in my opinion, on the used market, if you can find one in good shape, is the best deal on buying a cassette deck now. It was their top of the line when it was out, but it was a moment in history where Nakamichi decided to change their styling. All other Nakamichis had this hard-edged origami style black with gold lettering, and these were a dark battleship gray with rounded edges and white lettering and a weird font, and very 80s, and they are not pretty, but they are killer decks, and that was their top of the line, and it can be had for much less than any of the other top of the line Nakamichis. And I now own my dream Nakamichi, which is the ZX9, which is, again, it was their top deck when it was out. It was from the generation just prior to the Dragon and then the CR7A and all of that. But it's a beautiful deck, and legend has it that it was the deck that Nakamichi kept on hand to make their recordings. So they had ZX9s making their recordings that Nakamichi released, which was, they did a few of them, not very many of them. And I also have a Revox. I have the earlier Revox, the B710. So that's my thing. That's my treatise on cassettes. Goodbye from Devore Fidelity and the Devore Fidelity channel. Goodbye from Roxy. She says goodbye. And I will see you again soon on the next one.